I never thought my life would change so drastically when I met her. Emily was breathtaking, the kind of girl who seemed untouchable, her beauty almost unfair. Long blonde hair, mesmerizing green eyes, and a laugh that turned heads. She wasn't just stunning, she had charisma. Everyone wanted her attention. I met her during my sophomore year at the University of Michigan. I had just transferred and felt like a nobody. I was average looking, wore glasses back then, and didn't have much confidence. But when I saw Emily for the first time in the library, I knew I had to take a chance. She was sitting alone, headphones in, scribbling notes in her notebook. I hesitated for a second, unsure if I should interrupt, but I forced myself forward, heart pounding. "Hey," I said awkwardly. She looked up, pulling her headphones down. Her green eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, I forgot how to speak. "Hi," she said, raising an eyebrow. "You're in Professor Jenkins' sociology class, right?" "I thought I recognized you," I managed to blurt out. She nodded slowly, a small smile playing on her lips. "Yeah, I am. Why?" "I was wondering if you might want to form a study group. His exams are brutal, and I figured it might help." She tilted her head, studying me for a moment. Then, to my surprise, she smiled wider. "Sure. But just so you know, I don't go easy on study partners. You better be ready to keep up." I grinned like an idiot. "Deal." And that was how it started. At first, we only met to study. Emily was sharp, focused, and no nonsense when it came to schoolwork. But I quickly realized I wanted more. She wasn't just beautiful. She was clever, funny, and driven. The problem was, I wasn't the only one who noticed. Emily was the girl everyone wanted. Guys were constantly hanging around her, flirting, offering to carry her books, or buying her coffee. Some of them went further, giving her expensive gifts, designer bags, perfumes, even jewelry. I didn't stand a chance, but I couldn't give up. I started putting more effort into myself, ditching my glasses for contacts, hitting the campus gym, even buying a decent leather jacket. I wasn't flashy like her other admirers, but I hoped my persistence would set me apart. After weeks of study sessions, I finally asked her out. Not as friends, I clarified, feeling my cheeks heat up. To my shock, she said yes. Dating Emily was both a dream and a challenge. Every guy on campus seemed to have his eyes on her, and they didn't care that she was with me. They'd flirt with her in front of me, slip her their numbers, or send her gifts. It drove me crazy, but Emily always laughed it off. "You're the one I said yes to," she'd say, brushing off their advances like they were nothing. But then came Liam. Liam was everything I wasn't. Tall, confident, rich, and annoyingly charming. He was in her marketing class, and he always seemed to pop up wherever Emily was. They had their inside jokes, their shared projects, and a familiarity that made my stomach churn. One night, Emily casually mentioned that Liam had asked her out before we started dating. "He's sweet, but not my type," she said with a shrug. "And what is your type?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She smirked, leaning closer. "Someone who doesn't give up so easily." Her words felt like a challenge, and I wasn't going to let her down. A few months into our relationship, Liam started showing up more often. Emily brushed it off as coincidence, but I wasn't so sure. One night at a party, I saw them together in the backyard. Emily was laughing at something Liam said, her hand briefly brushing his arm. They stood too close, their conversation too intimate. My chest tightened. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I waited until we got back to her apartment. "Do you like him?" I asked, the question spilling out before I could stop myself. "What?" She looked genuinely confused. "Liam, do you like him?" She rolled her eyes. "You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" She sighed, kicking off her heels. "Liam's a friend. That's all. Stop overthinking it." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to trust her. But for the first time, doubt began to creep in. After that night at the party, I made myself stop overthinking things. Emily was with me, not Liam, not anyone else. For the rest of college, I focused on being the best boyfriend I could be. She stayed by my side despite all the attention she got. Guys still flirted with her, still sent her expensive gifts, but she always laughed it off. "You're the one I chose," she'd remind me, and that was enough to silence my doubts. Graduation came faster than I expected. Standing outside the stadium, I watched her pose for photos with her parents. She looked stunning in her cap and gown, her green eyes sparkling in the sun. Her parents were polite to me, but I could tell they thought she could do better. I didn't care. None of that mattered. I had a plan, and I wasn't going to let anyone make me doubt it. A week after graduation, I took Emily to a small Italian restaurant we both loved. It wasn't fancy, but it held memories, late-night study sessions, our first official date. It felt like the perfect place to ask her the biggest question of my life. When the food arrived, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small velvet box. "Emily," I began, my voice shaking. "I love you. I've loved you since the day we met. I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Her eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. For a moment, I thought she might say no. "Yes," she finally whispered, tears in her eyes. Then louder yes. The restaurant erupted into cheers, but all I could see was her. My Emily, saying yes to forever. The wedding came quickly. It wasn't extravagant. We couldn't afford much, but it was perfect in its own way. Emily looked like a dream in her white dress, and for a moment, all my doubts melted away. We moved to Chicago after the wedding. Emily had landed a job at a marketing firm, and I started working for a small tech company. The pay wasn't great, but it was a start. Emily fell in love with a sleek downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a stunning skyline view. It was far more expensive than we could afford, but she couldn't stop talking about it. I didn't have the heart to say no, so I picked up a second job delivering groceries to make ends meet. I was exhausted most days, but it felt worth it. I was building a life with the woman I loved. The first year was challenging but mostly happy. Emily excelled at her job, quickly climbing the ranks at her firm. She made friends easily, spending more time at networking events and happy hours. Meanwhile, I worked late into the night, barely keeping up with our bills. One evening, as I stumbled through the door after midnight, Emily was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Do you have to work so much?" she asked, not looking up. I sighed, dropping my keys on the counter. "We need the money. You know that." "I know," she said quietly, setting her phone down. "It's just, I miss you. We never spend time together anymore." I wanted to tell her that the only reason I was working 2 jobs was for her, to pay for the apartment she loved so much. But I bit my tongue. Instead, I promised her I'd find a way to balance things better. Still, I could sense her frustration growing. Emily started going out more often, sometimes with coworkers, sometimes with friends from college. She'd come home late, smelling faintly of wine and perfume. "It's nothing," she'd say when I asked. "Just a little decompressing after work." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But every time she left the apartment, a knot formed in my stomach. One night, she sent me a text. "Don't wait up. I'll be late tonight." I stared at the message, my chest tightening. She didn't even tell me where she was going. For the first time, I wondered if I was losing her. Married life wasn't supposed to feel like this. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. The first year had been full of small joys, despite the challenges. We had our moments, lazy Sundays on the couch, late-night conversations about our dreams. But those moments started to feel more like exceptions than the rule. Emily was slipping away, and I couldn't figure out how to hold on to her. She became more distant, spending most of her evenings out. When she wasn't at networking events, she was meeting friends from work. I worked too much to keep tabs on her, but every time she walked out the door in a new dress or with her makeup perfectly done, I felt something in me tighten. "Who are you meeting tonight?" I asked one evening, trying to sound casual as I slipped on my shoes for a delivery run. "Just the girls," she said, smoothing her hair in the mirror. She barely glanced at me. "Do I know them?" "Not really. They're coworkers." Her answers always felt so rehearsed. Maybe I was imagining it, but the nagging doubt wouldn't go away. The signs were subtle at first. Emily started spending more time on her phone, smiling at messages she wouldn't share. She'd get ready for nights out with an excitement I hadn't seen in a long time, like she was looking forward to something or someone. Then there were the late-night returns. She used to wait up for me when I came home from my delivery job, greeting me with a tired but loving smile. Now, she'd stumble in well past midnight, her laughter carrying through the apartment as she kicked off her heels. One night, I decided to stay up and wait for her. I sat on the couch, the TV muted, as the hours crawled by. It was almost 2 a.m. when I heard the jingle of her keys. She froze when she saw me sitting there. "You're up late," she said, her tone light, but her eyes cautious. "So are you," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Good night with the girls?" She nodded quickly. "Yeah, it was great. Just drinks and catching up." I watched her disappear into the bedroom, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. There was something in her voice that didn't sit right with me. The turning point came a few weeks later. It was a Saturday, one of the rare days we both had off. I suggested we spend it together, just the two of us, like old times. To my surprise, Emily agreed. We went out for brunch, walked along the river, and even laughed at some old inside jokes. For a moment, I felt like we were us again. But by the evening, she was back on her phone. "Hey," I said, sitting next to her on the couch. "Let's watch a movie or something." She hesitated, glancing at her screen. "Actually, I promised Megan I'd meet her for drinks tonight." "Megan again?" I asked, trying to hide my frustration. "Yeah, she's going through a rough time." Emily stood, smoothing her dress. "I won't be late." I didn't argue. I was too tired to fight, and besides, I'd learned by now that pushing her only made her more distant. But as the door closed behind her, I felt a pit form in my stomach. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, I tried to distract myself with work. I was updating spreadsheets for my tech job when my phone buzzed with a reminder. "Anniversary tomorrow. 2 years." I stared at the screen, my heart sinking. I hadn't forgotten. Not really, but I hadn't planned anything either. I was too busy, too tired, too caught up in everything else. Emily didn't mention it when she got home, and I didn't bring it up. I figured we'd celebrate the next day. But when I woke up, she was already gone. When I woke up that morning, the bed next to me was empty. Emily was an early riser sometimes, but this felt different. The apartment was quiet. No coffee brewing, no signs of her anywhere. I grabbed my phone and sent her a quick text. "Morning. Where'd you go?" No reply. I figured she might be out for a morning walk or grabbing something from the store, so I tried not to overthink it. But as the hours ticked by, I started to feel uneasy. By noon, there was still no word from her. It wasn't like her to disappear without saying anything, at least, it hadn't been like her in the past. Finally, around 1 p.m., my phone buzzed. "Sorry, went to brunch with Megan. Be home later." I stared at the message, a mix of relief and frustration bubbling up inside me. She didn't even mention our anniversary. Determined to salvage the day, I decided to surprise her. I ran to the store, grabbed a bouquet of roses and a small cake, and spent the rest of the afternoon tidying up the apartment. I told myself it didn't matter that she forgot. I'd remind her. By the time she walked through the door that evening, I was ready, the table set with candles and the cake. "Happy anniversary," I said, holding out the flowers. Her face froze. For a split second, she looked caught off guard, almost guilty. "Oh my God," she said, forcing a smile. "I completely forgot. Work's been so hectic, and Megan," she trailed off, taking the flowers from my hand. "It's okay," I lied, though her reaction stung more than I wanted to admit. We sat down to eat, but the atmosphere was awkward. She scrolled through her phone between bites, and I found myself wondering if she even wanted to be there. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. Emily turned away from me, her breathing steady as if nothing was wrong. But I couldn't shake the feeling that our anniversary was just another reminder of how far apart we'd grown. I wanted to ask her if she was happy, if she still loved me the way she used to, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, the doubt growing heavier with every passing minute. The morning after our anniversary, Emily acted like nothing was wrong. She smiled as she got ready for work, kissed me on the cheek, and left with her usual "love you." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the way she forgot about our anniversary. It was everything. The nights out, the distance, the way her phone seemed glued to her hand these days. I hated the way my thoughts spiraled. I'd never been the jealous type, but something about her behavior lately didn't sit right. That afternoon, while cleaning up the apartment, I noticed she'd left her laptop open on the coffee table. I tried to ignore it, but my eyes kept drifting toward it. The screen was dim, but I could see an email notification flashing in the corner. Curiosity got the better of me. I tapped the mouse, and the screen lit up. The email was from someone named Nathan, and the subject line read, "Can't stop thinking about last night." My stomach dropped. I shouldn't have clicked it. I knew I shouldn't have, but I did. The email was short, almost casual, but it said everything I needed to know. "Last night was amazing. I can't wait to see you again. Let me know when you're free." And my hands were shaking as I closed the laptop. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that maybe Nathan was a client or a coworker, and the email wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, I knew better. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus. My thoughts raced with questions. Who was Nathan? How long had this been going on? Was I imagining things? Or had Emily already checked out of our marriage? By the time she came home, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I needed more than an email. She walked in with her usual bright smile, but I couldn't meet her eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yeah," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired." She didn't press further, heading to the bedroom to change. I watched her go, a knot forming in my chest. I didn't want to believe it, but I was beginning to wonder if the woman I'd married was still the same person, or if I'd already lost her. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that email. The name Nathan echoed in my mind like a bad song on repeat. Every time Emily smiled at me, every time she kissed me goodbye, I wondered if she was thinking about him instead. But I didn't let on. If she noticed anything different about me, she didn't show it. That weekend, she went out again, this time for a work dinner. She wore her favorite black dress, the one she used to save for our date nights. I told myself I was imagining things, but the nagging doubt wouldn't let go. As soon as she left, I grabbed my phone and started searching for answers. Her laptop was password protected, and her phone was always locked, but I still had access to our shared accounts. I opened our phone bill, scrolling through her call logs and texts. Most of the numbers were familiar. Friends, co-workers, but one stood out. The same number appeared over and over again. Late at night, during her lunch breaks, even while I was sitting in the next room, I plugged the number into a reverse lookup website and held my breath. The name that came up made my stomach churn, Nathan Hayes. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the name on my screen. My mind raced with questions I wasn't ready to answer. Was this the same Nathan who'd emailed her? How long had this been going on? Part of me wanted to call the number right then and there, but I didn't. I needed to stay calm, to think things through. If I confronted her now, she'd deny it. I needed proof, something she couldn't talk her way out of. When Emily came home that night, I forced myself to act normal. She kissed me on the cheek, smelling faintly of wine and perfume, and smiled like nothing was wrong. "Dinner was great," she said, kicking off her heels. "We talked about this huge campaign we're launching next month. I think it's going to be a big deal for the company." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's great, Em. I'm proud of you." But inside, I was already making plans. I spent the next few days piecing things together. Emily thought she was being careful, but she underestimated me, or maybe she didn't care enough to cover her tracks. Either way, I started noticing patterns. She always went out on the same nights, claiming she was with coworkers or friends. Her phone never left her side, but I noticed how she'd angle it away from me, even when she was just texting. And then there were the excuses. "I have to stay late at the office," "Megan needs me," or "it's just work stuff." It wasn't work. I knew it wasn't. I didn't say anything, though. Instead, I started planning. If she was lying to me, I wanted to catch her in a way she couldn't deny. Friday night came, and Emily told me she'd be out late. "Megan and I are going to this new wine bar," she said casually, pulling on a coat. "That sounds nice," I replied, forcing a smile. "Have fun." She kissed me on the cheek and walked out the door without a second glance. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed my keys and left the apartment. I'd already done my homework. I knew Nathan's address, thanks to a quick online search. I didn't know what I'd find, but I had to know. I parked a few blocks away from his place, my heart pounding in my chest. The street was quiet, lined with neat townhouses. I wasn't sure what I was even looking for. Her car, maybe, or some kind of sign that she was there. And then I saw it. Her car was parked a few houses down, unmistakable with its slightly dented rear bumper. My chest tightened as I stared at it, the reality sinking in. She wasn't with Megan. She was here, with him. I couldn't bring myself to knock on the door. Instead, I sat in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The longer I sat there, the angrier I became. She was lying to me, sneaking around, acting like everything was fine while she was betraying me. I wanted to storm in, to confront them right then and there. But something stopped me. If I confronted her now, she'd twist it, find a way to make me doubt what I'd seen. I needed more. After what felt like hours, the front door opened. Emily stepped out, laughing at something Nathan said as he followed her to the car. He leaned in close, brushing a strand of hair from her face before kissing her. I looked away, my stomach churning. I didn't need to see any more. By the time Emily got home, I was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. She slipped into the room quietly, careful not to wake me. I listened as she changed into her pajamas, her movements soft and deliberate. When she finally climbed into bed beside me, I felt her shift closer, her hand resting lightly on my back. "I love you," she whispered, her voice so soft I almost didn't hear it. I didn't respond, because in that moment I realized something. I wasn't just hurt. I was angry, and I wasn't going to let her get away with this. The next day I met Sarah at the coffee shop. It was Emily's friend, and I wanted to talk and maybe find out something about my wife. The coffee shop meeting with Sarah had changed everything. Not just because she told me about Emily's affair, but because she didn't stop there. "Josh," Sarah had said after confessing what she'd seen. "This isn't the first time she's done something like this." "What do you mean?" I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. "She's been like this as long as I've known her," Sarah continued, her tone heavy with frustration. "Emily has a way of using people, taking what she needs and leaving wreckage behind. She did it to me once, and I should have seen it coming." "What happened?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. Sarah sighed. "It's a long story, but back in college we were close, like best friends. Then I found out she'd been hooking up with a guy I was dating at the time. She never even apologized, just acted like it didn't matter because she got what she wanted. After that, I distanced myself from her, but we stayed in touch for appearance's sake." I sat there in stunned silence, the pieces of Emily's personality falling into place. "I know this isn't my business," Sarah said, her voice softer now. "But if you want help figuring out what to do, I'm here." She's burned too many bridges, and honestly, she deserves a taste of her own medicine. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's words. Emily had not only betrayed me, but had also done the same to others without remorse. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. I called Sarah the next day. "Were you serious about helping?" I asked. "Absolutely," she replied without hesitation. We met again later that evening at a quiet bar where no one would recognize us. Sarah arrived with a notebook, ready to strategize. "I've been thinking," she began, flipping it open. "If you want to hurt Emily, you can't just confront her. She's too good at talking her way out of things. You need to hit her where it really hurts." "And where's that?" I asked, leaning forward. "Her image," Sarah said with a knowing smile. "Emily thrives on being seen as perfect. The perfect wife, the perfect coworker, the perfect friend. If people see the truth about her, it'll destroy her." Her words struck a chord. Emily's entire persona was built on appearances. If that fell apart, so would she. Sarah and I spent hours brainstorming, and slowly, a plan began to take shape. The first step was simple: gather evidence. Sarah still had connections to some of Emily's old friends, people who might know more about her patterns of betrayal. Meanwhile, I'd keep playing the role of the unsuspecting husband, making sure Emily didn't suspect a thing. The second step was riskier: exposing her. We decided it would be best to start small, planting seeds of doubt among her co-workers and mutual acquaintances. If Emily's image began to crumble in one area of her life, the rest would follow. But the third step, that was the one that made me hesitate. "What if we hit her professionally?" Sarah suggested. "I know someone at her office, a friend who's always hated her. If they knew what she was doing behind the scenes, it could ruin her career." I didn't answer right away. Destroying her marriage was one thing, but taking her career down with it felt like crossing a line. I'll think about it, I said finally, and Sarah nodded. Over the next few days, Sarah and I worked quietly, sharing updates and ideas whenever we could. She was relentless, digging into Emily's past with a determination I hadn't expected. You know, Sarah said during one of our meetings, I didn't think I'd enjoy this so much, but honestly, it feels good to finally stand up to her. She's gotten away with too much for too long. Her enthusiasm was infectious, but deep down, I couldn't ignore the gnawing guilt. Emily had hurt me, yes, but was I really prepared to sink to her level? Still, every time I saw her come home late, laughing at some inside joke from work, my resolve hardened. She didn't feel guilty for what she'd done to me. Why should I feel guilty for fighting back? One evening, as I sat across from Sarah, she handed me a folder. This is everything, she said. Names, dates, proof. It's enough to destroy her if you decide to use it. I took the folder, my hands shaking slightly. Inside were photos, screenshots, and testimonies from people Emily had wronged. This will work, Sarah said confidently. When you're ready, let me know, and we'll take the next step. I nodded, though my mind was spinning. The power to ruin Emily's life was in my hands, but I couldn't shake the question. Once I crossed this line, would I ever forgive myself? As I walked back home, the weight of the folder felt heavier with each step. The storm was coming, and I had to decide if I was ready to unleash it. The folder Sarah gave me sat on my desk for 2 days. I didn't open it, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew that once I did, there was no turning back. Every time I glanced at it, I felt a mix of anger, guilt, and something I couldn't quite name. But on the third night, when Emily came home late again, laughing into her phone as she stepped into the apartment, I finally reached for it. She gave me a quick wave before disappearing into the bedroom, oblivious to the storm brewing just feet away. I opened the folder. Inside was everything Sarah had promised. Photos of Emily with Nathan at restaurants, bars, even leaving his apartment. Screenshots of text conversations that left no room for interpretation. Notes from people who had seen her with him, including dates and locations. I read through it all with a sinking heart. This wasn't just a fling. It was a full-blown relationship. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd built an entire life outside of our marriage. By the time I closed the folder, my hands were trembling. Any doubt I'd had about what needed to be done was gone. The first step of the plan was subtle. I started reaching out to mutual friends and acquaintances, planting small seeds of doubt. She's been working a lot of late nights lately, I'd say casually. Or, you ever notice how she's always texting someone? I guess her job must be intense. People didn't question it at first, but I could see their expressions shift, a flicker of suspicion crossing their faces. Meanwhile, Sarah reached out to her contact at Emily's office, someone named Laura. Laura apparently despised Emily for reasons that went back years, and she was more than happy to help. She's not as perfect as everyone thinks, Laura said during a phone call. This is going to be fun. One evening, Emily came home from her usual work dinner looking annoyed. Something's going on at the office, she muttered as she poured herself a glass of wine. What do you mean? I asked, trying to sound casual. Laura's been spreading rumors about me, she said, her voice tense. Something about me being unprofessional. I don't even know where it's coming from. I shrugged, hiding my satisfaction. That's weird. Maybe she's just jealous. Emily rolled her eyes and brushed it off, but I could tell she was rattled. A few days later, Sarah sent me a text. Step 2 complete. Everyone at her office is buzzing about her and Nathan. I could almost feel the ripple effects from where I stood. Emily had spent years building her reputation as the golden girl, the one who could do no wrong. Now, that image was starting to crumble, and she had no idea who was behind it. The breaking point came a week later. Emily came home earlier than usual, slamming the door behind her. She looked furious, her cheeks flushed with anger. What happened? I asked, feigning concern. My boss pulled me aside today, she snapped, throwing her purse on the couch. He said there have been questions about my behavior outside of work. Can you believe that? Someone's trying to ruin me. I fought to keep my expression neutral, though inside, I was practically seething with satisfaction. Do you know who it could be? I don't know, she said, pacing the room. But if I find out, they're going to regret it. The irony was almost too much to handle. That night, as Emily slept, I made my final decision. It was time to end this charade. The next morning, I texted Sarah, "It's time. Let's meet." We met at the same bar where we planned everything. "Thanks for everything, Sarah. I couldn't have done this without you." "You're doing the right thing," she said firmly. "She deserves this." I wasn't so sure. But I knew one thing. Emily had made her choices, and now she'd have to face the consequences. That night, I waited for her to come home. When she walked through the door, I was sitting at the dining table, the folder in front of me. "Josh," she said, her voice cautious. "What's all this?" "Sit down," I said, my voice cold. Her eyes flicked to the folder, and I saw the first flicker of fear cross her face. "We need to talk," I said. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice cautious. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This was it. No turning back now. "I know, Emily," I said, locking eyes with her. "About you. About Nathan." Her face went pale, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she let out a shaky laugh, as if trying to brush it off. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't," I said firmly, cutting her off. "Don't lie to me. I've seen the photos. I've heard the stories. I know everything." Her laughter stopped immediately, replaced by a look of panic. "Josh, it's not what it looks like," she stammered. "I can explain." "Explain?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Explain how you've been sneaking around behind my back for months? How you've lied to my face every single day? Go ahead, Emily. I'd love to hear it." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders trembling. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice muffled. "It started as nothing. Just someone to talk to. And then, I don't know. I felt so alone, Josh. You're always working, always tired. I didn't feel like I mattered to you anymore." Her words cut deep, but I wasn't about to let her shift the blame onto me. "So, instead of talking to me, you decided to cheat?" I said bitterly. "That's how you handle feeling alone?" She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." I laughed, though there was no humor in it. "You didn't want to hurt me, but you went out of your way to hide it. You lied, Emily, over and over. Did you even care about me at all?" "Of course I did," she cried, her voice cracking. "I still do. Josh, I love you." "Stop," I said sharply, slamming my hand on the table. "Don't you dare say that to me. You don't get to say you love me after everything you've done." The room fell silent except for her quiet sobs. I stood up, pacing back and forth, the anger boiling inside me. "Do you even understand what you've done?" I said, my voice trembling. "You didn't just cheat on me. You destroyed everything we built together. For what? Some fling with a guy who probably doesn't even care about you." "It wasn't like that," she murmured, but I cut her off again. "I don't care," I said. "I don't care how you justify it. The fact is, you made a choice, and now you're going to deal with the consequences." She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face filled with dread. "What are you going to do?" I pointed to the folder. This is everything I have on you. Photos, messages, witnesses. You think your coworkers don't already suspect something? They do. And if I wanted to, I could make sure everyone you know sees the real you." Her eyes widened in horror. "Josh, please don't do that. I'll do anything. Just don't ruin my life." I stared at her, the woman I'd once loved more than anything, now reduced to begging for mercy. Part of me wanted to go through with it, to expose her for the liar she was and make her feel the pain she'd caused me. But another part of me hesitated. Was this who I wanted to become? Someone who stooped to her level just to get even? "I should ruin you," I said, my voice cold. "You deserve it. After everything you've done, you deserve to lose everything." She flinched but didn't argue. "But I won't," I continued, my voice softening. "Because I'm better than that. I'm better than you." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. "I'm done, Emily," I said, stepping away from the table. "This marriage is over. I'll be filing for divorce first thing tomorrow. You can keep the apartment, the furniture, whatever you want. I don't care. I just want you out of my life." She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. "Josh, please don't do this. I can fix it. We can fix it." "There's nothing left to fix," I said, my voice flat. "You made sure of that. I left the apartment that night. the weight of everything that had happened crashing down on me. For so long, I'd thought Emily and I were building something real, something lasting. But in the end, it had all been a lie. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me. As I walked away from the life we'd built together, I felt the first glimmer of something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom.